Chesperado back again. Part 2 of making your own chest bag. I realized there were a few items I may have forgotten in the first one, so here is part 2. Your cord. One thing I forgot to tell you is since you're dealing with a 5 inches, your cord is going to go around twice for when you make your drawstring. So generally you want 12 inches. That gives you a couple extra inches so you have some flexibility in the actual pulling of the cord. The second thing is, depending on where you get it and how it's cut, you may need to have the end taped off somehow, or maybe get like a metal clasp to cover the end from fraying over time. Getting back to the sewing, as you can see, I've done a lot more from the first video. Hopefully you can see how the stitching here is pretty solid. You have to be a little bit careful on the corners. When you're doing this by hand, generally you'll do an over and under stitching. So you go over the edges and then back under again. And at the corner, you want to be a little bit careful as far as how you end up sewing it. You will eventually need to work your way around from one edge to the other edge. So from the long edge to the short edge, and from the short edge here to the long edge. So that will give you as I mentioned earlier, be careful about catching the corners. One other thing here, which I'm hoping is not an issue in this case, and another important thing, is you can never have too much thread, but you can have too little. Because if you have too little thread, as you sew, you eventually may not get all the way around if you didn't start with enough thread. And I'm worried about that here. I don't know whether or not I'm going to make this. I'm going to make larger stitches than maybe I should as a result. It is preferable to have, if possible, somewhat uniform stitches, although that doesn't necessarily mean how far in or down you are when you put the needle through the pieces of cloth. That could vary a little. You don't want it to vary in a lot, because then you'll have points in your bag that are somewhat possibly a little uneven when you turn it inside out. It's not as likely to occur, but it's still possible, so you do want to be somewhat careful with that. I think I'm in luck. I may have enough thread here. It's going to be close. As I stated originally, In the first video, as you can see, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to do this, nor does it take Susie Homemaker. For those of you who maybe understand that reference, I'm a little old school at times, sorry. And getting near the finish here. One other thing that's a good thing to do is that you should preferably have maybe a second needle and thread prepared to do the drawstring closure. I'm going to be very close here. I may have to finish this off a little higher up than I want. Leave more than a ½ inch along the top edge. That is something else you can get away with, is that if you don't start and finish at the exact same points on each sides of the fabric. And I'm getting close. See where this one is. That's here. So in theory, I want to get up to here, which is going to be very close. So I've got to make very wide stitching up here at the top to make it up where I want it to go. See, right now I'm a little uneven. That would be okay because once it's inside out, you're going to be a little more solid here. And as I stated here, you eventually reach a point where you want to tie it off. So you're now going to sneak the needle underneath one of your last threads. I'm not sure if you can see this or not. Hopefully so. And before you finish pulling it all the way through, you want to stick the needle back underneath that. That way when you pull it through, you end up creating a knot so you can cut off the thread at that point. I generally will do this more than once, maybe a couple times. In this case, I'm a little low on the thread, so I'm only doing it twice. Once you've done that, you want to cut it off because you don't need too much. You don't want to get too close, but you also don't want too much left over. As I said, now that you've sewn up the bag from one edge around to the other, you now want to turn it inside out. So you grab it along the bottom, pull it through, turn it inside out, we have to push it down a little here and there, and eventually you have your bag. You can feel inside, you'll feel the corners puckered in. You can see puckered in, puckered in. You can see how none of the stitching shows because you've turned it inside out. So the only other thing then will be to do your cord, and do the lip of the cord. As I stated, this is best done with a fresh needle and thread. The first and most important thing is at the first edge. So you're going to want when you do the cord, you're again going to want to as I said, never too much thread, although it can cause you a little extra time. You're going to want to a number of times, oops, careful there, number of times cross over on the edge at the very start. This gives your tube a firm and solid anchoring. Oops, caught myself. So now it's solidly placed. You then want to work your way over. You're no longer going to do a cross stitch or over and under. You're going to just go through the fabric one way. Again, be very careful not to put the needle through the cord or drawstring. And then you're going to want to come back through the other way. And so you do this until you're done with one edge. When you get to the edge, you can maybe do a cross stitch here. It looks like I'd be able to get this firm. And then when you're done with the one side of it, you'll come over to the other side until you're finished, and you'll have yourself a new chest bag. That is it. I won't bother you with a lot more of my sewing. So once again, goodbye, and of course, good chess.